John Doe and Jane Doe are official test accounts created by Roblox CEOs David Baszucki and Eric Castle on June 25, 2005, though their joint dates are listed as February 27, 2006. These accounts were never hackers at all, but rather placeholder accounts used by developers to test platform functionalities during Roblox's early days. The names John Doe and Jane Doe are generic terms for anonymous individuals, making them perfect for testing purposes. The myth began gaining traction in early 2017 when YouTubers started spreading rumors that these accounts would hack Roblox on March 18, 2017. This caused mass panic across the Roblox community, with players genuinely believing their accounts would be compromised or deleted. The fear was so widespread that many players temporarily quit the platform or changed their passwords multiple times. What made this particularly convincing was the account's ancient creation dates and minimal activity. Players interpreted this inactivity as something sinister, when in reality these accounts were never meant for public use but became inactive over time as Roblox expanded. The accounts had basic avatars and no games, friends, or meaningful activity, which only fueled the mysterious narrative. Roblox eventually released an official statement explaining that John Doe and Jane Doe were simply old test accounts with no malicious intent, assuring players that these accounts were under their control and posed no security risks. Despite this clarification, the John Doe and Jane Doe legend remains one of the most persistent myths in Roblox history, demonstrating how powerful community-driven narratives can become even when completely unfounded. 1x1x1x1 represents one of the most elaborate hoaxes in Roblox history, often portrayed as a mysterious hacker with reality-bending powers. The character was popularized through various YouTube videos and stories claiming this entity could manipulate games, delete accounts, and even control players' avatars remotely. However, 1x1x1x1 is entirely fictional, a creation of the community's imagination rather than any actual hacking group or individual. The myth surrounding 1x1x1x1 typically involves stories of this hacker appearing in games unexpectedly, causing glitches, or displaying supernatural abilities like teleportation or game manipulation. These stories often include dramatic elements like red eyes, distorted audio, or messages appearing in chat that players supposedly didn't send. The character became so popular that it spawned countless fan-made games, stories, and even merchandise. What makes 1x1x1x1 particularly interesting is how the community collectively built this narrative without any basis in reality. Unlike other hacker myths that started with real accounts or events, 1x1x1x1 was born purely from creative storytelling and fear-mongering. The character serves as a digital boogeyman, representing players' anxieties about security and control in online gaming environments. The persistence of this myth highlights how online communities can create and sustain elaborate fictional narratives. While no actual account named 1x1x1x1 has ever posed a legitimate threat to Roblox users, the character continues to appear in horror games, creepypasta stories, and urban legends within the platform. This demonstrates the power of collective storytelling in digital spaces and how myths can take on lives of their own. Cool Kid is one of the few names in Roblox hacker lore that had some basis in reality, though the actual person behind this account was far less powerful than the myths suggest. This account was known for using exploits and scripts to disrupt games, particularly in the mid-2010s when Roblox's security was less sophisticated. The account primarily used basic exploiting tools that were readily available to anyone willing to download them. The typical Cool Kid attack involved joining popular games and using scripts to spawn objects, display messages, or cause minor disruptions. These weren't sophisticated hacking techniques, but rather the use of readily available exploit tools that took advantage of Roblox's client-server architecture vulnerabilities. The account would often target high-population servers to maximize the impact and attention of these disruptions. What elevated Cool Kid to legendary status was the community's reaction and the subsequent storytelling around these incidents. Simple script-based disruptions became elaborated into tales of sophisticated hacking, account theft, and system manipulation. YouTubers and content creators amplified these stories, often exaggerating the actual capabilities and impact of what were essentially pranks using common exploit tools. The Cool Kid phenomenon illustrates how the Roblox community often transforms minor incidents into major legends. While the account did engage in disruptive behavior using exploit scripts, the actual impact was minimal compared to the fears and stories that circulated. This case demonstrates how script kiddies, people using pre-made tools without understanding the underlying technology, can gain outsized reputations through community amplification and storytelling. Bloxwatch is basically a group of anonymous wannabe Roblox hackers who create accounts labeled as hacked and often spread threats of watching or hacking Roblox. Unlike singular figures like John Doe or Sears a Royal Kid, Blox Watch represents a collective of individuals who adopted a shared identity and methodology for creating fear within the Roblox community. This group's primary tactic involved creating multiple accounts with threatening usernames and profiles designed to intimidate other players. The Blox Watch accounts typically feature dark, ominous profile pictures, often with watching eyes or surveillance-themed imagery. Their account descriptions would contain vague threats about monitoring other players or having the ability to hack accounts. These accounts would join games and remain largely inactive, relying on their intimidating presence rather than actual disruptive actions to create fear among other players. What made Blox Watch particularly effective at instilling fear was their use of psychological tactics rather than technical ones. They understood that the mere suggestion of being watched or targeted was often more powerful than actual hacking attempts. Players would report feeling uncomfortable when Blox Watch accounts were present in their games, even when these accounts took no actual malicious actions. The group's impact was primarily psychological rather than technical. While they may have used basic exploit tools occasionally, their main weapon was fear and the power of suggestion. This approach proved remarkably effective, as players would often attribute random game glitches or connection issues to Blox Watch's presence, giving the group credit for problems they hadn't actually caused. The community represented a more organized approach to disrupting Roblox, functioning as a coordination hub for various individuals who wanted to participate in game raids and targeted harassment campaigns. Unlike the mythical figures or individual script kiddies, this group operated more like a traditional online raiding community, organizing coordinated attacks on specific games, groups, or individuals within the Roblox ecosystem. The group's activities typically involved organizing mass, joint events where multiple members would simultaneously enter a target game or group, overwhelming the space with spam, inappropriate content, or disruptive behavior. They would coordinate these attacks through external communication platforms, planning timing and targets to maximize impact. Their approach was more about social engineering and coordinated harassment than technical hacking. The community's methodology included doxing attempts, where they would try to gather personal information about target players, and social manipulation tactics designed to turn community members against each other. They would often target popular games or prominent community figures, understanding that attacking high-visibility targets would generate more attention and fear than targeting random players. What distinguished the community from other entries on this list was their focus on real harassment and coordinated attacks, rather than mythical stories or individual script kiddie behavior. While they may not have possessed advanced hacking skills, their organized approach to disruption and harassment made them a legitimate concern for targeted players and game developers. Their activities highlighted the importance of strong community moderation and the need for platforms to address coordinated harassment campaigns effectively. Elernate represents another pure fabrication in the Roblox hacker mythology, often described as a mysterious figure with godlike powers within the platform. Stories about Elernate typically involve this supposed hacker having administrator-level access to Roblox, being able to ban players at will, manipulate game code in real time, and even control the platform's servers. However, like 1x1x1x1, Elernate is entirely fictional with no basis in reality. The Elernate myth often includes elaborate backstories about this figure being a former Roblox employee who went rogue, or alternatively, an external hacker who gained unprecedented access to Roblox's systems. These stories frequently feature dramatic elements like Elernate appearing in games announced by mysterious messages, games suddenly becoming corrupted, or players losing their accounts after encountering this supposed hacker. What makes the Elernate myth particularly persistent is how it plays into players' fears about administrative abuse and system vulnerabilities. The idea that someone could have admin-level access without being an official Roblox employee taps into deep anxieties about security and control within online gaming platforms. This fear resonates especially strongly with younger players who may not fully understand how server architecture and user permissions actually work. The continued circulation of Elernate stories demonstrates how online communities can sustain elaborate fictional narratives through repetition and embellishment. Each retelling adds new details or capabilities, making the myth more elaborate and seemingly credible. Despite no evidence of any actual account or person named Elernate ever posing a legitimate threat, the character remains a fixture in Roblox urban legends and horror-themed content. Dude One represents another entry in Roblox hacker mythology, often described as a figure obsessed with collecting and hoarding other players' accounts. According to community stories, this supposed hacker would systematically target and steal accounts, building a vast collection of compromised profiles for unknown purposes. The myth typically involves stories of players discovering that their accounts had been accessed or compromised after encountering this figure, with some accounts allegedly being completely taken over and added to Dude, one's collection. The stolen accounts were described as being used for various purposes, from creating bot armies to conducting coordinated attacks on other players. What made Dude one particularly unsettling to players was the focus on systematic collection rather than random chaos. The idea that someone was methodically building a collection of compromised accounts suggested a level of organization and purpose that many players found more frightening than random disruption or destruction. This phenomenon reflects players' anxieties about account security and the permanence of their digital identities. The character embodies fears about losing control of one's online presence and having one's digital identity become part of someone else's collection. This case demonstrates how hacker mythology can incorporate themes of collection, hoarding, and systematic exploitation that resonate with players' concerns about digital ownership and security. Jared Valdez, also known as Jared Valdez 4, represents one of the more controversial figures in Roblox hacker lore, primarily because unlike purely mythical figures, this account was associated with actual disruptive incidents. The account was known for using sophisticated exploit tools and allegedly having insider knowledge about Roblox's systems, though many of the more dramatic claims about this figure have been greatly exaggerated over time. The Jared Valdez account gained notoriety for supposedly having access to advanced exploiting capabilities that went beyond typical script kiddie tools. Stories about this account often involved claims of database access, the ability to manipulate player statistics, or even influence the platform's economy through item duplication or Robux manipulation. However, most of these claims appear to be community exaggerations rather than documented facts. What made Jared Valdez particularly notable was the persistent rumors that this account belonged to someone with inside knowledge of Roblox's systems, possibly a former employee or someone with connections to the development team. These rumors, while never substantiated, added an air of credibility to the more dramatic claims about the account's capabilities and made the stories more believable to community members. The Jared Valdez case illustrates how the Roblox community often blurs the line between documented incidents and speculative storytelling. While the account may have been involved in actual exploiting activities, the elaborate narratives surrounding it demonstrate how real incidents can be transformed into legends through community amplification and embellishment. This phenomenon makes it difficult to separate fact from fiction in many supposed hacker cases. Bilderman represents one of the most unique entries in Roblox hacker mythology because it involves the corruption or impersonation of an actual Roblox administrator account. The real Bilderman was an official Roblox account used by the platform's administrators, but community stories often describe a corrupted or compromised version of this account engaging in malicious activities. The corrupted Bilderman myth typically involves stories of this normally trustworthy administrative account suddenly engaging in destructive behavior, such as banning innocent players, deleting popular games, or using administrative powers for malicious purposes. These stories often include dramatic elements about the account being hacked, corrupted, or controlled by malevolent forces. What made the Bilderman corruption stories particularly disturbing to players was how they involved the subversion of legitimate authority figures within the platform. The idea that even official administrative accounts could be compromised or corrupted represented a fundamental threat to the security and trustworthiness of the entire platform. The Bilderman phenomenon demonstrates how online communities can project fears about authority corruption and institutional failure onto gaming platforms. The character represents anxieties about what happens when trusted authority figures become threats, reflecting broader concerns about institutional reliability and the abuse of power. This case illustrates how hacker mythology can incorporate themes of authority corruption and institutional failure that resonate with players' concerns about power structures in digital environments. The corrupted Bilderman stories also highlight the psychological impact of authority figures becoming threats, as players' trust in the platform's security and reliability becomes shaken when even administrative accounts are portrayed as potentially compromised. This mythology reflects deeper anxieties about digital governance and the vulnerability of online institutions to corruption or compromise. Kazakh represents a more subtle entry in the Roblox hacker pantheon, often described as a mysterious figure who would join games and observe players without taking any overt action. Unlike the dramatic disruption associated with other supposed hackers, Kazakh's alleged method involved psychological intimidation through presence and surveillance rather than technical attacks or obvious griefing. The typical Kazakh encounter, according to community stories, involved this account joining a game and remaining largely inactive, often following other players around or positioning themselves in locations where they could observe the action. Players would report feeling uncomfortable or watched when Kazakh was present, even when the account took no obvious malicious actions. What made Kazakh particularly unsettling to players was the unpredictability and subtlety of the alleged behavior. Unlike accounts that would immediately spam or disrupt games, Kazakh supposedly employed a more psychological approach, letting players' imaginations and anxieties do most of the work. This approach proved remarkably effective at generating fear and unease within the community. The Kazakh phenomenon illustrates how the mere suggestion of being watched or targeted can be as powerful as actual malicious actions. Whether or not any account actually engaged in this behavior, the stories about Kazakh demonstrate how online communities can be influenced by psychological tactics and the power of suggestion. This case highlights the importance of understanding how fear and anxiety can be weaponized in online spaces, even without technical capabilities or actual harmful actions. Guest 666 represents one of the most enduring supernatural myths in Roblox history, combining the platform's former guest system with classic horror tropes about the number 666. According to community legends, Guest 666 was a malevolent entity that would appear in games as a guest account, bringing with it supernatural phenomena, game corruption, and terror for other players. The myth typically describes Guest 666 as having unusual abilities that defied normal game mechanics, such as floating through walls, appearing and disappearing at will, or causing the game environment to become dark and corrupted. Players would report encountering this guest account in various games, often accompanied by strange audio, visual glitches, or unexplained game behavior that seemed to follow the account's presence. What made Guest 666 particularly compelling was its connection to Roblox's actual guest system, which allowed players to join games without creating accounts. Since guest accounts were numbered sequentially, the theoretical possibility of a Guest 666 existing within the system lent credibility to the myth. Players would actively search for and fear encountering this specific guest number in their games. The Guest 666 phenomenon demonstrates how online communities can transform mundane system features into sources of supernatural fear. The guest system was simply a way for new players to try Roblox without commitment, but the community's collective imagination transformed it into a potential gateway for malevolent entities. This case illustrates how numerical superstitions and horror themes can be projected onto gaming platforms, creating persistent urban legends that outlast the actual features they reference. Void Script is portrayed in community lore as a sophisticated hacker capable of fundamentally altering the fabric of Roblox games, supposedly able to create void spaces where normal game rules don't apply. Stories about this figure typically involve the creation of endless black spaces, deletion of game assets, or the ability to trap players in dimensional pockets outside normal gameplay areas. The typical Void Script encounter, according to community stories, would begin with parts of the game world suddenly disappearing or turning black, followed by players finding themselves in empty void spaces with no way to escape. These voids were described as having no boundaries, no physics, and no way to return to the normal game world, effectively trapping players in digital limbo. What makes Void Script particularly notable in hacker mythology is the technical sophistication attributed to this figure. Unlike simple script kiddies using basic exploit tools, Void Script was allegedly capable of manipulating fundamental game systems, creating custom environments, and essentially rewriting game reality in real time. These capabilities far exceed what's actually possible through typical exploiting methods. The Void Script myth reflects players' fears about the stability and permanence of virtual worlds. The idea that someone could fundamentally alter or destroy the game environment taps into anxieties about digital spaces being reliable and persistent. This case demonstrates how communities can create elaborate technical narratives around impossible capabilities, using the complexity of modern gaming platforms to make implausible claims seem credible. Mr. Doombringer represents the archetypal end times hacker in Roblox mythology, often described as a figure whose very presence would signal the destruction or corruption of entire games. Community stories typically portray this supposed hacker as having the ability to permanently damage or destroy games, servers, or even entire groups within the platform. The Mr. Doombringer myth often involves apocalyptic scenarios where this figure would join popular games and systematically destroy them, turning thriving virtual worlds into digital wastelands. Stories include claims of permanent server corruption, the ability to delete other players' creations, or even the power to cause cascading failures that would affect multiple games simultaneously. What distinguished Mr. Doombringer from other entries in hacker mythology was the emphasis on permanent, irreversible damage rather than temporary disruption. While other supposed hackers were described as causing temporary chaos or fear, Mr. Doombringer was allegedly capable of lasting destruction that would permanently alter the Roblox landscape. The persistence of Mr. Doombringer stories demonstrates how online communities can project apocalyptic fears onto digital platforms. The character serves as a digital antichrist figure, representing existential threats to virtual worlds and communities. This case illustrates how religious and mythological archetypes can be adapted to modern gaming contexts, creating powerful narratives that resonate with players' deepest fears about permanence and destruction in digital spaces. Serenok is often described in community lore as a master of identity manipulation, allegedly capable of stealing player accounts, impersonating other users, or even duplicating avatars and usernames. This supposed hacker represents fears about identity security and authenticity within online gaming communities. According to the myths surrounding Serenok, this figure could assume the appearance and identity of any player, making it impossible to distinguish between the real person and the impersonator. Stories often involve Serenok joining games while impersonating trusted friends or popular community members, using these false identities to gain access to private information or manipulate other players. The Serenok myth typically extends beyond simple account theft to include more sophisticated forms of identity manipulation, such as the ability to perfectly replicate another player's avatar, friend lists, and even chat patterns. These capabilities far exceed what's actually possible through typical account compromise methods, entering the realm of advanced social engineering and digital impersonation. What makes Serenok particularly disturbing to players is how it undermines trust within online communities. The idea that anyone could be an impersonator creates paranoia and suspicion in social interactions, making players question the authenticity of their friends and community members. This case demonstrates how identity-focused threats can be particularly psychologically impactful in social gaming environments where trust and relationships are fundamental to the experience. Kizo represents a more subtle approach to digital destruction in Roblox hacker mythology, often described as a figure who would systematically and quietly destroy games from within rather than through obvious disruption. This supposed hacker was allegedly capable of introducing slow-acting corruption that would gradually degrade game performance and stability over time. The typical Kaizo attack, according to community stories, would be virtually invisible at first, with games slowly becoming more unstable, laggy, or buggy over days or weeks following the account's visit. Players would report that games which had been running smoothly would gradually develop problems, with many attributing these issues to Kaizo's delayed action sabotage. What made Kaizo particularly insidious in community lore was the delayed and subtle nature of the alleged attacks. Unlike hackers who would immediately spam or disrupt games, Kaizo supposedly employed a more patient approach, introducing problems that would manifest long after the account had left the game, making it difficult to trace the source of the issues. The Kaizo myth reflects players' anxieties about hidden and persistent threats in digital environments. The idea that someone could introduce problems that would manifest later taps into fears about digital security and the possibility of undetected compromise. This case demonstrates how communities can attribute random technical problems to malicious actors, creating elaborate narratives to explain ordinary software instability and performance issues. Noli is portrayed in Roblox mythology as a figure specializing in data corruption and file manipulation, allegedly capable of corrupting player accounts, game saves, or even entire game files. This supposed hacker represents fears about data integrity and the permanence of digital creations and progress. Stories about Noli typically involve players discovering that their accounts, games, or creations had been mysteriously corrupted or damaged after encountering this figure. The corruption was described as being more than simple deletion. Instead, it involved the systematic degradation of data, turning coherent information into digital gibberish. The Noli myth often includes technical-sounding explanations about file system manipulation, database corruption, or memory overwriting that sound plausible to players unfamiliar with how Roblox actually stores and manages data. These technical details lend credibility to otherwise implausible claims about the ability to corrupt data through gameplay interactions. What makes Noli particularly frightening to players is the focus on destroying their creative work and progress. In a platform where players invest significant time and effort into creating games and building up their accounts, the idea of systematic corruption represents a fundamental threat to their digital identity and achievements. This case illustrates how fears about data loss and corruption can be personified into malevolent figures in online gaming communities. Anti-Laser represents an unusual entry in Roblox hacker mythology as a supposedly good hacker, who would target and counter other malicious hackers on the platform. According to community stories, this figure operated as a vigilante, using hacking techniques to protect innocent players and combat other supposed hackers. The anti-laser myth typically involves this figure appearing in games where other hackers were causing disruption, using superior technical skills to neutralize threats, restore order, or even turn the attacker's own tools against them. Stories often portray dramatic confrontations between anti-laser and other legendary hackers, with spectacular displays of competing technical abilities. What made anti-laser particularly appealing to the community was the moral complexity it introduced to hacker mythology. While most supposed hackers were portrayed as purely malevolent forces, anti-laser represented the possibility of using similar techniques for protective purposes, appealing to players' desire for justice and protection in online environments. The anti-laser phenomenon demonstrates how online communities can create heroic narratives around technical capabilities, even when those capabilities are largely fictional. The character serves as a digital superhero figure representing the community's desire for protection and justice in online spaces. This case illustrates how hacker mythology can encompass both threats and protectors, creating complex narratives that reflect players' hopes and fears about security in digital environments. Verse represents one of the more supernatural entries in Roblox hacker mythology, often described as a cursed account that would bring misfortune to players who encountered it. Unlike hackers focused on technical disruption, Verse was allegedly associated with supernatural phenomena and unexplained bad luck. Stories about Verse typically involve players experiencing a series of unfortunate events after encountering this account, such as account restrictions, game crashes, friend departures, or even real-world problems. The curse was described as extending beyond the game itself, affecting players' broader Roblox experience and sometimes their lives outside the platform. The Verse myth often includes elements borrowed from traditional curse folklore, such as the curse being transferable to other players, the need for specific rituals to break the curse, or the curse becoming stronger with each person it's affected. These supernatural elements distinguish Verse from more technically focused hacker myths. What makes Verse particularly interesting is how it represents the intersection of gaming culture with traditional supernatural beliefs. The account serves as a digital version of cursed objects or malevolent spirits from folklore, adapted to the context of online gaming. This case demonstrates how ancient human fears about curses and supernatural retribution can be translated into modern digital contexts, creating persistent urban legends that blend technology with superstition. Dignity represents a unique entry in Roblox hacker mythology as a figure allegedly focused on moral judgment and punishment of other players. According to community stories, this supposed hacker would target players who engaged in inappropriate behavior, serving as a self-appointed moral enforcer within the platform. The dignity myth typically involves this figure appearing in games where players were being toxic, inappropriate, or cruel to others, then using various techniques to punish the offending players. Stories often describe elaborate forms of digital justice, such as temporarily restricting toxic players' abilities, publicly exposing their bad behavior, or creating karmic consequences for their actions. What made Dignity particularly compelling to many players was the moral dimension it introduced to hacker mythology. Rather than random chaos or malevolent destruction, Dignity supposedly operated according to a moral code, targeting only those who deserved punishment and protecting innocent players from harassment or abuse. The Dignity phenomenon reflects players' desire for justice and moral order in online gaming environments. This case illustrates how hacker mythology can incorporate moral themes and justice narratives, creating figures that embody the community's ethical aspirations rather than their fears. Aphrodite represents a more psychologically focused entry in Roblox hacker mythology, often described as a figure who would use social manipulation and seduction techniques rather than technical exploits. This supposed hacker was allegedly capable of manipulating players through charm, persuasion, and psychological tactics. Stories about Aphrodite typically involve this figure using an attractive avatar and sophisticated social skills to gain the trust and affection of other players, then exploiting these relationships to gather information, manipulate behavior, or cause drama within gaming communities. The approach was described as more subtle and psychological than other supposed hackers. The Aphrodite myth often includes elements of social engineering, catfishing, and psychological manipulation that reflect real concerns about online safety and deception. Unlike purely technical hacker myths, Aphrodite stories focus on the human elements of digital deception and the vulnerability of players to social manipulation. What makes Aphrodite particularly notable is how it represents fears about emotional manipulation and deception in online relationships. The character embodies concerns about trust, authenticity, and emotional safety in digital social environments. This case demonstrates how hacker mythology can encompass social and psychological threats as well as technical ones, reflecting the full spectrum of vulnerabilities that players face in online gaming communities. Tubers93 represents one of the more recent and well-documented cases of actual disruptive behavior on Roblox, unlike many of the purely mythical figures discussed earlier. This account gained notoriety through a series of coordinated attacks on popular Roblox YouTubers' games and events, specifically targeting content creators and their communities during live streams and recordings. The Tubers93 attacks typically involve joining games while YouTubers were recording or streaming, then using exploit scripts to display inappropriate messages, spawn disruptive objects, or crash the game entirely. The account would often target high-profile content creators with large audiences, understanding that disrupting their content would generate maximum attention and impact. What made Tubers93 particularly notable was the strategic targeting of content creators rather than random players. The account seemed to understand that attacking popular YouTubers would result in the incidents being recorded and shared widely, amplifying the impact of the disruptions far beyond the immediate participants. This approach demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how attention and notoriety work in online communities. The Tubers93 phenomenon highlighted several important issues within the Roblox ecosystem, including the vulnerability of popular games to exploit attacks, the challenges of protecting content creators during live events, and the way that disruptive behavior can be amplified through social media and video platforms. A-Girl Jennifer represents one of the more disturbing and serious cases in Roblox security history, involving an account that allegedly engaged in predatory behavior while posing as a young girl. This case differs significantly from the mythical hackers discussed earlier, as it involved actual documented incidents of inappropriate behavior and potential predatory activity targeting minors on the platform. The A-Girl Jennifer account would typically target younger players, using a female avatar and persona to build trust and establish relationships with children. The account would engage in grooming behaviors, attempting to extract personal information, manipulate victims into inappropriate conversations, or convince them to move communications to external platforms where predatory behavior could continue without Roblox's moderation oversight. What made A-Girl Jennifer particularly dangerous was the sophisticated social engineering approach employed. Rather than using technical exploits or obvious disruptive behavior, this account relied on psychological manipulation and the exploitation of children's trust and naivety. The predator understood that young players were more likely to trust someone they perceived as a peer, making the deceptive persona an effective tool for gaining access to potential victims. The case highlighted critical issues around child safety on gaming platforms and the challenges of protecting minors from predatory behavior in online environments. Unlike technical hacking incidents that primarily threaten accounts or game stability, predatory accounts like this pose direct threats to the physical and emotional safety of real children. This case demonstrated the importance of robust safety systems, user education about online predators, and the need for platforms to take proactive measures to identify and eliminate predatory behavior. The incident also illustrated how traditional hacking mythology can sometimes obscure more serious and immediate threats to player safety. The Exploit Squad represents a more organized and technically sophisticated approach to Roblox exploitation, functioning as a network for distributing exploit scripts, tools, and techniques, rather than individual accounts causing disruption. This group operated more like a traditional hacking collective, focusing on developing and sharing technical tools for bypassing Roblox's security measures. Unlike the mythical figures or individual script kiddies discussed earlier, the Exploit Squad functioned as an actual community of technically inclined individuals who would collaborate on creating exploit tools, sharing vulnerabilities, and coordinating more sophisticated attacks on the platform. They operated through external forums, Discord servers, and websites where they would distribute scripts and coordinate activities. The group's activities typically involved developing and sharing exploit scripts that could be used for various purposes, from simple game disruption to more sophisticated attacks like item duplication, currency manipulation, or admin command spoofing. They would often target newly released games or features, attempting to find and exploit vulnerabilities before Roblox could patch them. What distinguished the Exploit Squad from other entries on this list was their focus on technical development and community building rather than individual notoriety or chaos. They understood that sustainable exploitation required continuous development, community support, and adaptation to Roblox's evolving security measures. This approach made them a more persistent and technically challenging threat than individual accounts using pre-made tools. The Exploit Squad phenomenon illustrated how modern online platforms face threats from organized communities rather than just individual bad actors, requiring more sophisticated and adaptive security responses to address coordinated technical threats. Quackity HQ Raiders represents another case of content creator audience mobilization, where popular YouTuber QuackityHQ's followers would organize coordinated raids on various Roblox games and communities. This phenomenon demonstrated how content creators could inadvertently or intentionally weaponize their audiences for mass disruption and harassment across gaming platforms. The raiders would typically coordinate through QuackityHQ's community platforms and social media, organizing mass invasion events where hundreds or thousands of followers would simultaneously join specific Roblox games, often those featured in the content creators' videos. These raids often involved spam, inappropriate content, exploit script usage, and coordinated attempts to overwhelm targeted games' moderation and infrastructure systems. What made QuackityHQ raiders particularly impactful was the massive scale of coordination possible through a popular content creator's audience. The raids could involve thousands of participants, creating unprecedented levels of disruption that could completely overwhelm targeted games and communities, effectively making them unplayable during raid events. The phenomenon also highlighted complex questions around content creator responsibility for audience behavior and the challenges of maintaining creative freedom, while preventing harmful audience mobilization. The raids often targeted games or communities that had been featured or criticized in QuackityHQ's content, creating direct links between content creation and mass harassment. The QuackityHQ raiders case illustrated broader issues around influencer culture, audience mobilization, and platform responsibility in the modern internet ecosystem. It demonstrated how content creators can inadvertently become focal points for coordinated harassment, and the challenges that platforms face when dealing with harassment that originates from legitimate content creation activities. Life in Prison Raiders emerged as a coordinated harassment group that specifically targeted Roblox's prison-themed roleplay games, organizing mass raids designed to disrupt gameplay and harass both players and game developers. This group represented a more organized approach to griefing, coordinating attacks through external platforms to maximize disruption and psychological impact. The group would typically organize through Discord servers or other external communication platforms, planning coordinated attacks on specific prison roleplay games during peak playing hours. Their raids would involve dozens of accounts simultaneously joining target games and engaging in various forms of disruptive behavior, from spam and inappropriate content to coordinated rule-breaking that would overwhelm moderation systems. Their tactics often included role-playing as corrupt correctional officers, organizing prisoner riots, or flooding games with accounts designed to crash servers through resource exhaustion. The group understood that prison roleplay games relied heavily on structured gameplay and community cooperation, making them particularly vulnerable to coordinated disruption. What made Life in Prison Raiders particularly harmful was their focus on psychological harassment and community destruction rather than simple technical disruption. They would often target specific players for extended harassment campaigns, attempting to drive them away from their favorite games and communities through persistent, negative attention. The Life in Prison Raiders phenomenon highlighted how coordinated harassment groups can exploit the social dynamics of specific game genres to maximize their impact. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe, and you also might enjoy watching these. Thanks.